Let's talk more about insulin resistance. Take it right from the top. This is something that is so pervasive these days, affecting a lot of people without them knowing.
Yeah.
Walk me into the average person eating an average diet and how that disease process manifests over 15 to 20 years, sometimes without people even knowing it.
When you Google insulin resistance, it's just going to state like the end stage of the process. They're going to say insulin resistance is when your body's cells don't respond properly to insulin. So from my point of view, we want to ask, why is that? Because the body is infinitely smart. Why would it just randomly stop responding to insulin? And we have to understand that everything about the body is it's infinitely intelligent. It's trying to maintain homeostasis. It's trying to respond and adapt to every change in our environment. And that's the magic word, is adaptation. Insulin resistance is an adaptation. It's not a disease. It's not a condition. It's a state of adaptation. So if you play guitar a lot, you're going to grow calluses on your fingertips. That's an adaptation. The body is protecting itself. It's knowing, hey, this guy does a lot of that. Let's try to protect ourselves. If you exercise at high altitude, or if you move to 15,000 feet above sea level, you're going to upregulate your red blood cells tremendously. That's an adaptation because there's less oxygen. So let's increase our ability to carry oxygen. And insulin resistance is the same way. We are trying to adapt to the avalanche of carbohydrates. So our ancestors didn't have that. We didn't have sugar, we didn't have processed starch, and our genome is unchanged for 250,000 years. The difference between, genetically, the difference between humans on the planet today is about, the similarity is 99.9%. You can go to any two people on the planet and our genome is 99.9% the same, which is the exact same number as we find from people 250,000 years ago when Homo sapiens first came on the scene. So we are no more different between ourselves in this day and age than we were from 250,000 years ago. And those people didn't have sugar. They didn't have white flour. They didn't have processed foods or over-processed anything. They probably had a foundation of meat and fish because those were the most calorie dense. They helped us survive when food was scarce. And then they probably ate more plant food in the summer. If you lived in a tropical region, you probably ate a lot of fruit. But nowhere ever did you get 300 grams of processed carbohydrate, which is going to skyrocket your blood sugar. So the cells, they need fuel. They're asking for fuel. Fuel drives every process of a cell. So first time you come a knocking on the door of the cell and you say, hey, would you like some glucose? It says, yeah, that'd be great. Let me have some. And then if it takes till next day before you ask again, the cell is going to say, oh yeah, please, I just used it up. Let me have some. But if you come knocking every 5 minutes and you say, hey, here's some glucose, and then you knock 5 minutes later, the cell says, no, I'm fine. I already got some. Okay. It's going to start resisting the action of insulin. It's like a door salesman. If you're really lonely, you might appreciate some company. So you say, oh, come on in, come on in. And if he doesn't come back for a year, now you're cool. But if he comes back 5 minutes later and says, would you be interested? You're going to develop a resistance to salesmen, right? So the cell is just trying to protect itself from too much fuel because it can't use the fuel. It takes in glucose, and then the excess gets turned into fat. But there's a point where it says, no, I've got the fat I need stored. I've got the glucose that I need to run. Now it's going to start resisting. So now insulin doesn't work. But it's only because we basically force fed that poor cell. When the cell starts resisting and we still have high blood glucose, now we need to raise insulin. So there's a message to the pancreas to increase insulin so we can lower blood sugar, right? Because high blood sugar is dangerous. Really low blood sugar or really high blood sugar will put you in a coma, right? The brain depends on a very steady, not too high level of glucose. So high glucose is basically an emergency, and that's why the body is so quick at pitching out more insulin to bring it down. If humans could tolerate a blood glucose in the thousands, we wouldn't need insulin. Then we just let it rise and wait, but we can't do that. We have to bring it down. And that's part of another misconception where people say that carbohydrates is the preferred fuel because we burn it first or because we burn it mostly. No, it's the fuel that is dangerous in excess that we have to bring the blood glucose down. We have to get it out of the bloodstream, and that's why we burn it first. And then we burn it mostly because that's mostly what people eat.
Okay, let's keep this story going. So far,
right.
Cells become overwhelmed. Blood glucose starts to go up. Insulin goes up to protect. Somebody who's brand new to this might be saying, okay, well, where's the problem here? Take that story and continue.
Yeah. The problem is that insulin is basically high levels of insulin adapted by excess carbohydrates is now force feeding the cell, right? So the cell becomes overfed and congested. And this is essentially all there is to metabolic disease. Like that's what it is. It's overfeeding and it's congestion. It's really that simple. So once we get to that point, now insulin has to be kept at ever increasing levels until we become diabetic, and now they introduce metformin or they inject you with exogenous insulin. And as soon as they do now we force feed that cell even more. And that cell becomes more and more unhealthy and congested. It can't perform its functions anymore. It's like, I've often used the analogy of a pantry that are fat storage. The body stores fat on purpose, and it's like a pantry. You put things in there so that you can go there later and retrieve some food. That's the purpose. But with high insulin, it's like that pantry is a one-way door. You can only put things in, you can never take things out. So now all the food in there, all the stuff in there gets old and rancid and decomposes. That the quality and the freshness goes down. And so it is with the cell. That's why there's so much benefit to fasting and autophagy, because it's a way of cleaning out the pantry. And we were designed for short cycles of energy storage. It's like we hunt something down, we find some honey, we gorge ourselves, and we gain 3 pounds. Well, that's because we wouldn't necessarily find food for the next 3 days. So we put some stuff in, and then we take some stuff out. And then we had seasonal swings as well, that there's more plant food in the summer. There's more food availability overall in the summer. And those plants, it's fine if we eat some tubers and some carbohydrates, because we're just trying to pack on enough fat. We're trying to become a little bit insulin resistant so we can pack on energy reserves to survive the winter. And those who were extremely insulin sensitive, they were maybe not able to pack on so much fat, so they perished in the winter. Whereas those with some degree of insulin resistance or a higher tendency toward it packed on more fat and were more likely to survive. So that's kind of the whole purpose that we need to remember.
And part of the problem here is, as an adaptation, the body keeps bringing the insulin up, chronically keeps it up to keep that blood glucose down and protect the body.
Yeah.
And if people are only getting their blood glucose measured, they can miss this. And like I opened up saying, this can happen silently in the background for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, your insulin is sky high the whole time and you're not knowing it. So
Yeah.
talk about when somebody has that high insulin, the damage that can happen throughout the body.
So we know that high blood glucose is one part of the problem. High insulin levels is a bigger part of the problem. Because high glucose, it causes swelling, it causes microvessel damage, it's what causes blindness and kidney damage, for example. But high insulin is what clogs up the cell and causes all of the downstream effects from metabolic syndrome, low-grade inflammation, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and it's all connected, high blood pressure. So we know this is like 90% of degenerative disease has this common mechanism. So insulin is the thing to watch. And just like you said, though, the problem is they're not watching it. You have to beg your medical doctor and threaten to try to get it done. And it's a cheap test, but they just refuse because they've been trained to focus only on blood glucose. And I've talked about this in many, many videos, how let's say that you start getting into the age where you might become a little bit insulin resistant. That's different for different people. Well, let's call it 30, because when you were 20, you were invincible, you could do whatever. And then you get into your 30s, and let's just put some numbers on it. So a healthy blood glucose, let's call it 85, and a healthy insulin level, let's call it 3. So that's where we want to be. That's very metabolically healthy, very insulin sensitive. But then you keep eating, or you start eating, you stop exercising, you start eating more, you get busy, so you eat 3 meals a day at the drive-through because it's convenient and it saves time. So then a year, let's say 3 years later, now you go to the doctor and they do your blood work again, and they only measure blood glucose. And the glucose only went from 85 to 88. Right? So the doctor says, oh, you're fantastic. That's sensational. That's as good as it gets. But if they had mentioned insulin, they would have seen that it doubled, hypothetically. Okay? So what's happening now is that you're twice as insulin resistant as you were, even though your glucose is the same. And if you had taken that insulin test and you understand what we're talking about, you understand if you act right now, there's really no damage done, and it's very easy to reverse the trend. All you have to do is start eating real food and keep watching that insulin. But that's not what people do, because the doctor says, oh, you're in such great shape, perfect markers. So another few years go by, and they measure insulin again, and now it's 92. And it's still in the so-called perfect zone because they don't really even notice before you get to 100. There's no flag on your blood test. But again, with that 92 glucose, your insulin now might be 10 or 12. So you've gotten 3-4 times more insulin resistant. You're really kind of starting the trend. And this is where most people are. It's like 80-90% of the population, even with perfect blood glucose numbers, this is where they are on the slippery slope, because we don't measure the stuff that matters. And just like you said, it's going on in the background, seemingly in the background, because we don't measure the stuff that matters. So it might be 15, 20 years before that glucose or that A1C is in a pre-diabetic or diabetic level. So we're basically, by measuring shallow stuff, I'm not saying we should absolutely measure glucose and A1C, but the one that really matters, that can tell us what's going on behind the scenes, is the insulin. And we could catch this stuff 20 years earlier, before we have all the blood pressure and the diabetes and the obesity.
To get really specific with people that want to have this tested, the insulin, would it be either the Kraft test or fasting insulin?
It needs to be fasting insulin. What was the other one you said?
The Kraft test, where they're taking multiple measurements over time.
Oh. Those are good, but it's like you do less before you do more, right? And a fasting insulin test is going to be enough for 95% of people, because it's going to give you a number, you know where you are. Now, for some people, the situation's a little bit more complicated, or they might be a little bit more advanced, and now you want more data. So that's where you go and take those tests. But those are more time consuming, the more invasive. They make you drink like 100 grams of glucose, make you feel like crap, shock your system, especially if you're not used to glucose. If you're not used to carbohydrates, your body just totally freaks out on a test like that, because it hasn't seen that in years. It's like, what is this stuff? So you always start with the simplest, cheapest test that gives you the most information, and then you go further if you need more information.
Somebody at home right now, they're going to go have the insulin tested, but they want to get a good idea right away whether or not they're in this camp of insulin resistance. Most people these days are, but what are the early signs somebody can look for at home right now to know where they're at?
Yeah, well, the first and easiest is a big waistline. If you're gaining weight, insulin did that, right? Because it's a storage hormone. You can't really put on weight without it. A type 1 diabetic cannot put on weight. They can eat 100,000 calories. They can pump oil or glucose. They can't pump oil into their blood. That wouldn't be good, but you get the idea. There is no way for them to get any sort of fuel into the cell without insulin. So insulin is the storage hormone. So if you're gaining weight, that's your first clue. Then there's a myriad of other signs. Basically, anything that modern people experience, like afternoon fatigue, poor sleep, poor stress tolerance, anything pretty much boils down to this low-grade chronic inflammation. And basically, wherever you look, whatever condition that you study, there's a link back to this.
To me, there's some good news when it comes to this. A couple pieces. One being, it is such a common denominator for so much chronic disease.
Yes.
It's not like we need to go out hunting for the root cause of cancer and heart disease and then try and moderate our diet to be preventative in all these different realms. And two, there is a lot of hope here for people that are in the earlier stages, potentially even later. We can make the changes we're going to talk about today to reverse this.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the whole idea of an adaptation. It's not a condition. There could be some tissue or organ damage, but for the most part, it's reversible. But the biggest part of an adaptation is you pushed your body there. So if you stop pushing, it's going to come back to the beautiful middle ground where it likes to be.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
High blood glucose is one part of the problem. High insulin levels is a bigger part of the problem. High glucose causes swelling, microvessel damage, blindness, but high insulin clogs up